I'm just a grandmother. A woman who once raised 3 children with trembling hands and unwavering love. A woman who poured everything she had into her family meals, prayers, sleepless nights, every last dollar of her savings. And I never expected the people I loved most to leave me for dead. But they did. They took my money, my home, my dignity. And they left me frail, forgotten, waiting in a cold hospital hallway. As if I were already gone. It didn't happen all at once. No betrayal rarely knocks loudly. It seeps in quietly like water through the cracks. It starts with, "Don't worry, Mom, we'll take care of the bills." Then it's, "Just sign here so we can help manage your accounts." Next it's, "You don't need the stress of making decisions anymore." Before I knew it, my name was removed from the deed of my own house. My savings account had disappeared into family emergencies that never came with explanations. And my own daughter, my sweet, soft-spoken daughter, looked me in the eyes and said, "It's better this way, Mom. You wouldn't know what to do with money now anyway." I trusted them. That was my first mistake. I believed that blood meant loyalty. That being a mother, a provider, a caretaker, a constant, would protect me. But mothers are often seen as resources long before we're ever respected as humans. We give, and then one day, the hands that once reached for your cookies are the same hands that sign your life away. It all came to a head the day I was taken in for a medical checkup. I thought it was routine. Instead, it was a drop-off. They wheeled me into a hospital room, signed a few forms I never saw, and left. No goodbye, no visit, no return. For 3 days, I lay in a sterile room, wondering where I was, why I was alone, and when my family would come back. They never did. They had taken what they wanted, and they were done. But what they didn't know, what they would never understand, is that I still had something they didn't count on. I still had my will. Not the paper kind. The kind that lives inside a woman who's weathered decades of sacrifice and sorrow. The kind that doesn't die even when everything else is stripped away. I may have been old, alone, broke, but I wasn't broken. Not yet. And this was only the beginning of the story. Before I tell you how I came back, you need to understand who I was, who I had always been. I wasn't born strong. I became strong because I had no choice. I married young. Too young if I'm honest. At 19, I traded my last name for a promise of stability, of love, of a future. Instead, I got years of biting silence and bills that somehow always fell to me. But I endured. I raised 3 children mostly on my own, though my husband was always there in the house physically. But emotionally, spiritually, absent. He believed women don't need appreciation. They need obedience. So I cooked every meal, paid every utility, sewed Halloween costumes, stayed up all night holding crying babies, and then got up to go to work anyway. And when my husband passed, I grieved the man I wished he had been. Not the one he was. I poured everything into my kids. When they were hungry, I went without. When they needed books, I skipped medication. When they needed encouragement, I gave them my entire heart. And for a time, I believed they loved me back. Every birthday, every Mother's Day, I hoped for a small sign that it mattered. A letter, a flower, even a sincere thank you. But the years passed, and the visits grew fewer. They grew up and into their own lives, and I faded from view. Until one day I wasn't Mom anymore. I was an inconvenience. It began slowly. At first, they insisted I move closer to them. "Just to keep an eye on you, Mom. You shouldn't be living alone at your age." I thought it was concern, but in hindsight, it was the start of control. Then came the papers. "You don't need all that legal stuff, Mom. We'll handle your finances for you. Don't worry." It was my oldest son who pushed the hardest. He said he wanted to protect me from scammers. Funny how the real scammers had my eyes and my blood. I didn't realize what had happened until it was too late. My name had been removed from everything. Bank accounts, title deeds, even the life insurance policy I'd paid into for 30 years. I was no longer the matriarch. I was a dependent, a burden, and yet I still believed they loved me. That's the hardest part to admit. Even as the money disappeared, even as they rolled their eyes at my questions, I held on to the hope that they wouldn't hurt me. Because I was their mother. Because I had given them everything. But everything was exactly what they came for. And when there was nothing left to take, they left me in a hospital room with a broken wrist and a forged signature on the discharge papers. That was when I realized they hadn't just taken my money, they had stolen my identity. But the one thing they forgot, you cannot kill a woman's spirit when she's already walked through fire. And I had more fire in me than they could ever imagine. The hospital room was cold, not just in temperature, but in energy. No one came to visit. No one called. No one asked if I needed anything. I lay in that stiff white bed with my wrist in a cast, and bruises blooming like rotten fruit across my skin. And every time a nurse came in, she would give me that same pitiful look, the one that says, "Poor old woman. Where's her family?" I wanted to scream, "I have a family. I gave them my whole life." But the truth, they didn't want me anymore. The discharge nurse handed me a clipboard. "Your son already signed you out," she said. I blinked. Signed me out to go where? She flipped a page. "Here, some extended care facility. A friend of the family is coming to transport you." I felt the ground fall out from under me. A facility, I hadn't agreed to that. And a friend, I had no friends they would know, let alone trust. 2 hours later, a van pulled up. No greeting, no explanation. Just a man in a jacket who said, "Come on, let's go. I've got orders to drop you off." I was too weak to resist, too confused, too broken. He took me to a house I didn't recognize. Not a care facility, not a nursing home. Just a small, dark house on the edge of town. And when the door shut behind me, I knew something was terribly wrong. The room I was led to had no windows, no phone, no clock. Just a narrow bed, a bucket, and a bolted door. And that's where I stayed. For nearly 3 months, I wasn't allowed outside. They brought me food once a day, slid through a small hatch. Cold soup, bread, water. I didn't know who was feeding me. I didn't know who was watching. I just knew it wasn't random. This had been planned. Someone wanted me gone, but not in a dramatic way. Not on the news, just quietly erased like an old file on a computer. And worst of all, no one was coming to find me. Because the people who should have been looking were the ones who locked the door. The days blurred. I scratched the wall to keep count. Tried to remember the sound of laughter. Tried to stay sane. And every night I whispered, "God, if you still see me, please remind me that I'm still real." I didn't need vengeance in that moment. I just needed to feel human again. But what they didn't realize is, hope has sharp edges. And even a caged woman can start sharpening her soul. They thought they buried me. They didn't know I was a seed. You'd be surprised what you can hear through silence. At first, I thought I was alone in that house. But over time, when the night settled and the outside world went quiet, I began to notice sounds, footsteps, a kettle boiling, whispers behind the walls. And once, just once, a soft, childlike laugh. I wasn't in an abandoned place. I was in someone's home. Someone was living upstairs, while I was locked below. That thought nearly broke me. They were living their lives, cooking, cleaning, laughing, all while I sat on a cot eating stale bread and wondering if I would die in the dark. Every time I tried the door, the metal bolts mocked me. But I didn't scream anymore. I learned the routine. One meal, no questions, no answers. I became a ghost in their basement. But ghosts remember everything. One afternoon, I noticed something different. The tray of food came earlier. Still cold, still tasteless, but the timing was off. And more than that, there was a shadow. A new one. A smaller one. It stayed at the hatch, hesitant. And then a whisper. "Why are you down there?" My heart nearly jumped out of my chest. A child. I crawled to the hatch. My voice cracked as I replied, "Because someone put me here, and they don't want me to come out." There was a long pause. Then the voice again. "Are you bad?" I laughed bitterly. "No, sweetheart. I'm just forgotten." That child saved me. Not immediately. But over the next few days, she returned. She slid extra crackers through the hatch. Once a folded napkin with a note scribbled in crayon, "Don't worry, I see you." It undid me. Those 4 words were more than kindness. They were oxygen. I started talking to her every day. I didn't know who she was. A neighbor's kid, a grandchild of whoever owned the house. It didn't matter. She was the first soul in months who treated me like a person. I asked her name. She said, "You can call me Ray, like sunshine." And in a place without light, Ray was exactly what she became. Then one night, something changed. There was a scuffle upstairs, raised voices, then footsteps thundering down the stairs. The hatch flung open not gently, and a rough hand reached in. "Don't talk to the kid again," a voice hissed. "She doesn't know who you are. You say one more word to her, and we'll make sure you don't eat it all." The hatch slammed. I bit my lip to keep from sobbing. Not from fear, from fury. That voice, it was my son's. I knew it then with gut-churning clarity. This house wasn't just some hideaway. It was my son's property. He had locked me away like a broken appliance. And Ray must have been his daughter. My own granddaughter had stumbled onto me. She thought I was a stranger, because that's what they told her. But now I had a name, a connection, a crack in the wall they built, and I wasn't going to stop there. They buried me in silence, but now I had a voice. And even if it was a whisper, it was about to shake the whole house. I barely slept that night, not because of fear, but because of clarity. You see, when you're stripped of everything, your voice, your place in the world, your dignity, you start to see things others can't. I wasn't just a forgotten grandmother anymore. I was a witness. And I had a thread. A thin, golden thread of truth. Her name was Ray. The next morning, I heard the floor creak above me. She was back, not alone. 2 sets of footsteps. One light, and one heavy. A man's voice. "You don't go near that door again, Ray. You hear me? That woman is sick, dangerous, not right in the head." My breath caught. She tried to speak, but she was crying. A loud slam, a muffled whimper, then silence. I wanted to scream, tear through the door, but I had no weapons, no power.
Just memory.
And oh, what a memory I had. Let me tell you something about being old. They think you forget. They think your mind drifts. But I remember everything. Every signature, every financial transfer. Every word my son said when he begged me to move in after my husband died. "It'll be safer, Mom. You don't need that big house. Sell it. Live here. We'll take care of you." Take care of me. He meant take control. They forged papers, moved my money, cut off my friends, changed my number. Then one day, I didn't have a room anymore. I had a basement. But this time, I had something stronger than memory. I had Ray, and she was asking questions. Later that week, I found a folded note hidden in the food tray. Written in careful block letters, childish but clear. "Are you my grandma?" I wept when I read it. Not out of joy, but out of guilt, because I didn't know how to answer. The next day, I scribbled my reply with a broken pencil they left behind months ago, on the back of a cracker box flap. "Yes, Ray, I am, but they don't want you to know. Please don't get in trouble. Be safe. I love you." I folded it small, slid it into the tray slot before the next meal arrived. It was risky, but I had nothing left to lose. The following morning, no food tray came, just silence. Cold. I waited for hours. My stomach twisted with fear. Had they found the note? Then just as I was about to give up, a single knock on the hatch.
Soft. Timid.
"I believe you," she whispered. "I saw a picture of you. You were holding me."
That was it. One sentence, but it cracked the world open. Because now, I wasn't just a ghost in a basement.
I was someone's grandma again, and that meant no matter what. I had something to fight for. For days, that one whispered sentence became my heartbeat. "I believe you." It gave me the strength to breathe again, to think, to plan. Ray was just a child 8, maybe 9. But she had more courage in her tiny hands than the adults upstairs had in their entire bodies. And now, the two of us were connected quietly, secretly, through scraps of paper, glances through the hatch, and late-night whispers. It was like planting seeds in darkness, hoping someday they'd find the sun. I wrote more notes, one each day. Short, careful words. "How many locks are there on the door? Do you have a key? Is there anyone at school you trust?" She answered in her shaky little handwriting. 4 locks. I only have key to top 1. My teacher, Miss Carroll, is nice. My dad watches me when I use the computer. Even in captivity, a plan was forming. A fragile one. But it was real. Then came the note that stopped my heart cold. They said you were never coming back upstairs. Daddy says you're going away soon. I read that over and over again. Away!
I knew what that meant.
They were planning something final.
Maybe a home, maybe worse.
They wanted to erase me. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I prayed. Not for rescue, not even for revenge. I prayed for one thing time. Just a little more time. And then it happened. One morning, through the hatch, Ray slid a folded piece of paper and whispered, Miss Carroll gave me her phone number. I didn't tell her anything yet. Should I? I couldn't answer fast enough. I wrote, Yes, please, tell her where I am. Tell her you're scared. Use your school computer. Do not tell your father. The next day, no tray came. No whisper, no knock. I waited and waited. My fear twisted into something feral. Did they find out? Had she been punished? Was she gone? Then at midnight, I heard footsteps, fast, and the hatch creaked open. A voice, not Ray, a woman, older, calm but firm, Mrs. Harlow. My name is Officer Ramirez. You're safe now. We're here. You're not alone anymore. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was a hallucination. But then the light hit my eyes.
Real light, not basement light.
Daylight. And standing behind the officer, her hands trembling, her eyes red, was Ray. She didn't say a word. She just held up the photo from years ago, me holding her as a baby. I knew it, she whispered. I knew you were mine. I broke down. Years of silence poured out of me in one unstoppable cry. But in that moment, I realized something. They had taken everything. My money, my freedom, my voice. But they couldn't take my truth. And that truth, carried by a brave little girl, was the key that unlocked the door. But the story wasn't over. Because freedom doesn't come without justice. You might think that once the basement door opened, everything turned into sunshine. But healing doesn't come that fast, especially when the ones who hurt you share your blood. I spent the first few nights in the hospital. Doctors were shocked I had survived so long. Malnutrition, dehydration, bruising, infections. But the most damaged part of me wasn't my body. It was my belief in family, my belief that love protected you. When they asked me if I wanted to press charges, I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. Yes, I want the world to know what they did to me, and I want them to hear it from me. The trial began 6 weeks later. It became the most talked about case in the county. TV vans parked outside the courthouse. Everyone wanted to know, how could a family lock up their own grandmother? Why would a woman in her 70s be treated worse than an animal? My son, his wife, and even my daughter sat at the defense table. I looked at each of them, and they looked away. Every single one. I was nervous that first day on the stand. But then I saw Ray in the front row next to her teacher, Miss Carroll. She gave me a thumbs up, and suddenly my voice came back. I told the jury everything. How they moved me in. How they took my pension. How they told neighbors I was sick then, in rehab, then just gone. How one day they stopped letting me upstairs. And the locks went on. I told them about the smells, the hunger, the darkness. The long months I thought I'd die and no one would know my name. But I also told them something else. I told them about Ray, how a child saved my life. The courtroom was silent. Tears rolled down strangers' faces. And when I stepped down, the judge looked at me like I was something sacred. 3 weeks later, the verdict came in. Guilty. Aggravated elder abuse, unlawful imprisonment, financial exploitation. My son got 15 years, his wife 10, and my daughter, who just didn't know 3 years in mandatory therapy. I wasn't happy, but I wasn't angry either. What I felt was free. The headlines the next morning read, "Grandmother left to die in basement speaks out in courtroom victory." But that wasn't victory to me. Victory was being able to walk out of that building, now with Ray holding my hand. But I still had one more thing to do. Build a life of my own, this time on my terms. After the trial, I didn't go back to my house. Why would I? It was no longer a home. It was a memory wrapped in darkness. Instead, I moved into a small senior apartment complex on the edge of town. Quiet, clean,
with windows that let the sun in, and locks on the inside where I controlled them. People from church brought casseroles. Neighbors I never knew came with flowers. The mailman left a note that simply read, "You are not forgotten." But the most precious gift came in the form of a child's voice. Ray. She started visiting me every Friday after school. Sometimes she brought drawings. Other times, just stories about her week. Grandma Ellie, she called me. Not Mrs. Harper. Not ma'am. Grandma. Like I mattered again. We made a tradition out of baking cookies on Saturdays. She loved snickerdoodles and I loved the sound of laughter in my kitchen again. One afternoon, she looked up at me with her bright eyes and said, "Are you going to write a book about what happened?" I laughed. "No, sweetheart, I don't think anyone wants to read that." "I do," she whispered. "I think the world should know, so they can protect their grandmas too." That moment stayed with me. She was right. I started journaling again. 1 page turned into 10, 10 turned into 100. It wasn't just therapy. It was truth being rescued from silence, and as I wrote, something unexpected happened. I began to forgive. Not forget, never forget. But I let go of the chain that tied me to their cruelty, because that's what they did to me. They locked me down, hoping I'd stay quiet forever. But their mistake. They didn't bury me. They planted me, and I grew back stronger. A year passed. Ray's parents, after the news story, reached out and said they were proud of her, that they didn't know she had it in her. I told them, she always did. She just needed to be seen. I joined a community center, helped lead support groups for women like me. You'd be amazed how many grandmothers are silently suffering behind closed doors. Too ashamed, too afraid. But one by one, we helped each other speak. And slowly, we healed. Together. I thought I was forgotten. I thought I was thrown away. But Ray proved me wrong. And so did I. 2 years after I moved into my new home on a calm Sunday morning, I heard a knock on my door. It wasn't Ray. It wasn't the sweet lady who brings banana bread every second Tuesday. It was my oldest son, Mark, the one who signed the hospital release when they said I was unstable. The one who told everyone I was getting senile so they'd stop asking questions. He stood on my porch like a man holding the weight of 1,000 regrets. "Hi, Mom," he said softly. His voice trembled. So did mine. "Why are you here?" I asked, not coldly, just honestly. I needed to see you. I needed to say I'm sorry." I didn't answer. I didn't invite him in. I just stood in that doorway, remembering every night I cried in the dark, every scream that went unanswered, every insult I swallowed while making dinner with hands that once rocked him to sleep. "We didn't know what Dad was doing," he continued. "He said you were paranoid, that you needed help, and you believed him. I didn't want to, but it was easier to pretend. There it was, the truth finally spoken aloud. Not because he was brave, but because he had the luxury to walk away from it. "We spent your savings," he confessed. "Dad told us it was a gift, that you were done using it." I felt something shift inside me, not pain, not rage, clarity. "You didn't just believe him," I replied. "You let him use you, and then you threw me away." Mark cried, real tears this time. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I had to try." He reached into his coat and placed something on my porch. A letter. I didn't pick it up until long after he left. Inside, he had written pages about his own childhood, about the guilt, about the nightmares, about his daughter, my granddaughter, who was now old enough to ask, "Why don't we visit Grandma?" That letter, I never responded, but I didn't burn it either. Because healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means knowing your worth and choosing peace over pain. Ray and I made spaghetti that night. She played music from her little speaker and danced around my kitchen with bare feet and flour in her hair. "I love you, Grandma Ellie," she said as she hugged me from behind. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. Blood may betray you, but love always finds a way back. After Mark's visit, a quiet settled in my heart. It wasn't peace, not entirely, but something softer than anger. Something warmer than grief. And I owe it all to Ray. Not by blood, not by obligation, just by love. It started small, like most beautiful things. One morning, Ray noticed how my garden had been overrun with weeds. "You know," she smiled, My mama taught me how to grow tomatoes so fat they'll insult your sauce if you don't cook 'em right. We spent hours outside that day digging through dirt, both of us sunburned and laughing like schoolgirls. Another day, I told her about a dream I used to have of owning a little corner bookshop. The kind with creaky floors, warm tea, and handwritten notes in every jacket flap. "Let's build it in your living room," she said. And so we did. We stacked used books donated by her friends, painted wooden signs, arranged flowers in jars like centerpieces for forgotten stories. People started coming. At first, just Ray's friends, then neighbors, then strangers from towns over who heard about the grandma who lost everything but served stories and tea like a queen. They'd sit on the old velvet couch by the window and listen to me read. And sometimes they'd cry, because when you've been through the dark, you recognize the flicker in someone else's eyes. One teenage boy came in and asked me, "Do you believe people change?" I told him what I knew. People don't change. They reveal. And sometimes they return to who they were meant to be. He left that day with a worn copy of The Little Prince and a hug. You see, I never got my money back. I never saw justice served in court. But I got something more sacred, myself. I used to cry in the dark, praying someone would remember me. Today, I tell stories under the light of 100 sunrises I never thought I'd live to see. And every time someone knocks on that door, I know I matter. Because Ray saw me when no one else did. Because kindness, when given without condition, rebuilds more than homes. It rebuilds souls. It was a year later when I heard the knock, a familiar rhythm, hesitant, awkward. I opened the door and there stood Daniel. Behind him, his wife, and my 2 grandkids clinging to her dress like they didn't recognize the woman who once braided their hair every weekend. I stood frozen. Daniel looked thinner, his eyes hollowed out by guilt, or perhaps just life not going as planned. He opened his mouth, closed it. Finally, he said the one thing I never expected. "Mom, I'm sorry." Ray stood behind me in the doorway. I didn't have to look back to know her presence was solid and calm like an oak tree I could lean against if I started to sway. Daniel's wife stepped forward and said, "We didn't know how bad it got. We didn't know he took everything." The words sounded rehearsed. They brought a pie and flowers and pain I had buried so deep it took everything in me not to slam the door. But I didn't, because I had changed. I wasn't the woman who needed their love to feel whole. I was the woman who built a sanctuary from scraps and broken years. So I let them in, not because they deserved it, but because I wanted my grandchildren to see the kind of strength that forgiveness holds, not the kind that trembles, but the kind that towers. We sat in the kitchen. The pie remained untouched. Daniel cried. For the first time in his life, my son cried in front of me. "I lost everything," he whispered. "No," I said gently. "You threw everything away." He looked at Ray, then around at the cozy chaos of my bookshop home. "I didn't think you'd survive." I looked him square in the eye. "That was your first mistake." They asked to visit again, regularly. To reconnect. To start over. I said maybe. I needed time. Not to heal, I had already done that. But to decide if I wanted them to witness the version of me they tried to bury. Because make no mistake, I was not the same. The weeks that followed their visit felt strange, like I was living in 2 timelines at once. One part of me still heard Daniel's apology echoing through the house like a ghost, unsure of its welcome. The other part of me kept living, watering the peace lilies by the window, labeling used books with Ray, sipping morning tea with the local artist who painted my window sign for free. But I wasn't lost in bitterness. I had something better. Boundaries and clarity. And the unshakable knowledge that a broken heart can be rebuilt stronger, wiser, and wrapped in grace. Ray asked me one day, "Do you want them back in your life?" Really? I stared at her a long moment, then said, "I want them to know me, but I won't let them hurt me again." She smiled. "Then that's enough. That's your power." That night, I began writing again. Not just my memories, but the lessons. For women like me, for grandmothers who feel invisible. Mothers who are used and left behind. Wives who forget who they are while loving someone who never truly saw them. I titled it, "She Was Left to Die But Chose to Live."
The manuscript grew over months, word by word, tear by tear. Sometimes I'd read a paragraph aloud to Ray. Sometimes I'd cry in the middle of a sentence and walk away. But I always came back, because my story wasn't just pain, it was proof. Proof that a woman can rise after being erased. Proof that healing doesn't need permission. Proof that even when family forgets you, you can remember yourself. When I finished, Ray printed it, bound it in simple blue covers, and placed the first copy in our front window. It sold out in 2 days. People started coming not just for books, but to talk, to share their own stories, to sit on the worn velvet couch with coffee and a warm silence. And every now and then, a woman would whisper to me I thought I was alone. Until I read your words, I'd squeeze her hand and say, so did I, but we never are. It was a rainy Tuesday, gray sky, soft thunder, the kind of day that makes you want to wrap yourself in old quilts and memories. I was rearranging a shelf when the doorbell chimed. I turned expecting a regular customer, but when I saw who stood there, every nerve in my body paused. It was Emma, my granddaughter, the one who used to braid my hair on Sundays and fall asleep in my lap while I read her stories. She looked older, sadder, but still had my eyes. She held a copy of my book in one hand, water damp at the corners. In the other, a small bouquet of wild daisies. Grandma, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I read everything. I didn't know. I stood frozen for a second. Then I nodded. Just once. She came in quietly, sat where she always used to, curled into that corner like no years had passed at all. And then she cried. Not loud, not messy, but the kind of cry that comes from shame, from knowing the damage your silence caused, from regret. I thought Mom and Dad were doing the right thing, she whispered. They said you were sick, confused, that you wanted to be alone. My heart twisted. I'd imagined this moment so many times, but not like this. Not with her eyes red and hands shaking. I know now, she said, and I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I believed the lies. I walked over and sat beside her, not as the grandmother she remembered, but as the woman I'd become. Stronger, wiser. Not angry, but not willing to lie to myself either. I won't pretend it didn't hurt, I said gently, but I also won't carry that pain forever. She looked up. Can I come back? Not to stay, just to know you again. I smiled. Let's take it one story at a time. Over the weeks, she visited often. Sometimes she helped Ray in the shop. Sometimes we just sat in silence, sipping tea and watching the rain. She never forced an apology, never asked for absolution. She simply showed up again and again. And sometimes that's how healing begins, not with big speeches, but with small, quiet choices. Emma kept showing up. That's what surprised me most. Not the apology, not the tears, but the steady, quiet commitment afterward. She didn't try to erase the past. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep. She simply came back day after day, helping me fold aprons in the cafe, walking customers to their seats, even learning how to make my cinnamon chai blend just right. One morning, as we sipped tea and watched the snow fall through the window, she looked at me and said, I told Mom I've been seeing you. I raised an eyebrow, and she hung up on me, Emma admitted. But I don't care anymore. I see the truth now. And honestly, I feel like I've been asleep for years. I reached out and touched her hand. No one wakes up all at once, I said. But you're here now. That's what matters. By springtime, something remarkable began to happen. Not just with Emma, but with others. Former neighbors who had whispered behind my back sent handwritten notes of apology. A man from church stopped by with fresh bread and tears in his eyes, saying he'd judged me wrongly. Even a local reporter inspired by my book asked if I'd be willing to speak publicly about elder abandonment and financial abuse. It felt strange to be heard, to be seen. For years, I had lived in the shadows of other people's versions of me. Now I stood fully in my own light. One night, I sat with Ray and Emma after closing the cafe. We were tired, our feet aching, the radio humming soft jazz in the background. And Emma asked, do you ever wish it had turned out differently? I paused. I used to,
I admitted. I used to wish I had been loved right the first time, that I hadn't had to claw my way out of my own grave. But now I looked at both of them. Now I'm glad I know what I'm made of. I'm glad I found my own hands to hold. There's something holy in surviving. Not just enduring, but turning your scars into a story that saves someone else. And though I lost almost everything, I had gained a life I never thought possible. Not perfect, but honest, full, real. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of the younger me sitting on that basement floor, wondering if anyone would ever care. And I whispered into the darkness, "You made it. You're not alone anymore." If you're still listening, still with me after all this time, I want to say something, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a woman who knows what it means to be forgotten and still rise. I used to believe that silence was safety. That if I didn't speak up, if I didn't make waves, I would at least be left alone. But silence, I learned, can be its own kind of prison. And sometimes the only way to escape is not through the door someone else left open, but by building your own key out of every moment you chose yourself over fear. They took my money. They left me to rot. But what they didn't know, what they never expected, was that I would find my voice, my fight, and eventually, my people. And that, my dear listener, is why I share this with you. Not for pity, not for revenge, but for the grandmother right now sitting in a chair, wondering if anyone sees her. For the mother who gave everything and is now being told she's a burden. For the quiet women, the forgotten women, the used and discarded ones. You are still here, and your presence is a miracle. You don't need to scream to be strong. But you do need to believe that you matter, that your story matters, and that your healing is worth fighting for. Today, I still serve tea at my cafe. I still wear my rose gold earrings and hum old jazz tunes while I mop the floor. But every time I lock the door and walk to my small cottage, I feel something I hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because finally I belong to myself, and there is no richer inheritance than that. If you too are a mother or grandmother who has quietly sacrificed, if you've ever sat in a silent room and wondered where your worth went, let me tell you, it never left you. It was always inside you, waiting to be remembered. So what would you have done in my place? And more importantly, what will you do now that you know you're not alone? Because you're not anymore.